How to start a game. Okay, well, let's make a video on that. Well, first you launch your client. Let me just do that here in my other window. I have a double monitor set up. So here I have my client. Now, when you first install Vassal, you will not have any modules installed. You will have to download the modules separately and then open the modules. So you would go to Open Module, navigate to where you have it, click on it, and it would open up. After that, it'll always show up in the list. So here I'll show you my Starfleet Battles module. Now I have a dual monitor setup, so I like to have my stuff open up in multiple windows. And there's a setting and preferences where you can set that up. Okay, so this is the type of typical screen you're going to get. You can either start a game offline or one online. You can load a save game or load a tutorial. So typically you're going to want to be playing online against an actual live opponent. So that's the one you're going to choose most of the time. You'll then get a little server window. Right now you are in the main room kind of thing. So they put a little blurb in here telling you exactly what that's all about. So you need to create a room to play in. You can call it anything. So you just create it. You're now in that room. You no longer need this window, so you can minimize it. There are some other functions in here. Like there's a little thing here for looking for a game away from keyboard. You can even send people messages kind of thing. But anyway, so now you're in your game room and you want to start a game. At this point, every module is going to be a little bit different. So basically, go up to your file, and there's probably going to be a new game, or there's probably pre-built scenarios that you can load up directly. So let's go to New Game. This pulls up the setup window. So here I could actually not select a board, and I'll end up getting a completely blank map, which you don't want to do. So select a board. So Starfleet Battles is a space game played on a hex grid. So that's the type of map that we get. Now you have an option to join a side. You don't have to do this. You can just load the game up as an observer and then later join a side. Okay, so now my map window has opened. Like I said, I use a multiple monitor setup, so usually I have my map on one monitor and my game control window on another one. But let's put it all on one video monitor here for the video. Okay, so this is going to prompt you if you want to make a log file. You can play back your games later using a log file. You don't have to do a log file, so I'm going to say no. If you ever do have one, you can load it up, and there's an option to begin one and start one kind of thing, but you can always load a game log or continuation, and there's a step through button here where you can literally walk through the game that you previously played. Okay, so you now have a map and you're now in here. So how do you start a game? Well, at this point it's like setting up a board game. So we're going to become a player. Here, I'll be a Federation player. So my own personal stuff gets put into my own hand area or SSD area window. So I'm going to open up my Federation window. So this is where I put my stuff. Only I can touch the stuff in here. And then you have your counters and your playing pieces. So just like Monopoly, you want to pick up your playing piece, the shoe, the dog, the car, whatever. Well, it's the same thing here. You get your counter. So I'm going to go into counters. I'll plop that in here. And there's lots of different types of things here. So under Federation, I have ships. I have drones, which are weapons. I have shuttles, fighters, plasmas. I have different types of counters. I have a text SSD kind of thing, energy allocation form. So lots of various things in here. But for now, all I'm going to do is grab a counter. Now this game uses counter sheets for your ship, so we need one of them. So I'm Federation player, so I grab one of my playing sheets. So this is a cadet game, got a lot of them in here, so I'm just going to grab a cadet cruiser, drag that into my playing area. So that is my ship. Okay, now the counter here usually goes on the map, so let me zoom out. Now you can pretty much start anywhere on a map like this. Typically one player would start at the top center and one player would start at the bottom center. So I'm just going to plop it on the map there. And then you start using your game sheet. Well, in my game sheet here, I've got, it's a sealed bid sort of game where you allocate your energy for the turn, you then play the turn, you then reallocate your energy and play the turn. So that's what you would do here. So there's an energy allocation form, two ways of doing it. I'm going to use the one that says show data, which is a spreadsheet form. So I would fill in my power systems for what I'm going to do for the game for turn one, end it. And then in most games you've got some sort of a turn tracker of some sort. Now in Starfleet battles there's actually a couple ways of doing this. There's a graphic speed caller and a non-graphic speed caller, and there's a sequence of play. The sequence of play is how everything happens, every impulse. So you have a turn, and every turn is composed of a number of impulses, and in those impulses you have steps. So basically it's like impulse 1, certain ships of certain speed move. Within that impulse, after movement, you can then do things like tractor beams, transporters, fire your weapons, etc. And then you call the next impulse. So that's what your speed caller is going to be. So let me pull up the graphic one here. Now there's an 8 impulse game, 16 impulse game, and 32 impulse game. So let me just grab the one for the 16 impulse game. So we do have this chart. So what the players do is after they allocate their ships, they set their speeds. So the controller sets those speeds on the movement chart, and then they start calling impulses. So let's say my ship is speed 7. Let's say my opponent was speed 6. Okay, well in the first impulse, neither of them move. Well, the impulses are composed of steps. That's what we call the SOP steps, sequence of play steps. So after ship movement, you have these steps. So ships that want to turn their ship sharply can do what's called an HET, or a tactical maneuver, which is a shorter version of the HET. It's not as violent of a turn kind of thing. If you're Romulan, you can cloak or uncloak. You can operate your tractor beams, launch weapons, various other weapons, play with your shields, lower them, raise them, reinforce them. Various races have certain types of weapons that happen at certain spots. You have transporters. If you're moving along, you no longer want to continue moving, you can declare an emergency deceleration. If you have shuttles or fighters on the board, they can get into a dogfight. You can launch or land your shuttles, and you can fire your weapons. That's what happens every single impulse. But of course on this impulse, nobody's doing anything. So next impulse, that was impulse 1 by the way, then impulse 2, nobody moves, same thing, those steps happen if anybody wants to do them. Step impulse 3, we both move. So my opponent moves his ship because he's slower, and then I move my ship. So then I move my ship, and then we go through the SOP steps again. And then once you've gone through all 16 impulses, it's time to reset for a new turn. You re-energy allocate your ship, and away you go kind of thing. And during the turn, if you fire weapons at each other, you can shoot your ship, shoot your opponent, and you damage your ship kind of thing. So that's how this type of game is played. But most games, it's kind of similar. You put your playing pieces on the board, and there's some sort of turn tracker. Now there's also other types of trackers here. So that was a graphical one. So here we also have 1632 speed callers echoes to chat. So if I pull up the one for the 16 impulse game, it just opens up a little floating window. And if I click through the little plus symbol here, it's like impulse 1, speed 16s, impulse 2, those speeds, impulse 3, those speeds. So it's the same thing as this, but instead of having a graphic on the board, it just echoes it to chat. So some games may have something like that. So for instance here, impulse 3, all those ships' speeds could move. So any ship going from 16 to 11 would move. Ship speed 10 and 9 and 8 do not move. Ships moving 7 and 6 do. Ships moving speed 5 and under do not. And those are the same things you'll find here. 16 down through 11, 7 and 6, and everything else does not move. So those are your speed callers. And then you get your sequence of play. Well, I showed you the button up here, sequence of play steps. Well, you got the same thing again, has a different form. So here's a graphic version of it. So that's a simplified version. That's what you start to learn when you first begin the game, but then it gets a little bit more complex. It breaks the steps up a little bit more, and then you get into the full game where it starts to kind of combine them. So here you've got moving ships and moving shuttles and moving seeking weapons all as one step, whereas here it would say move ships, then move seeking weapons, and resolve seeking weapons. Well, here it just combines as one step, but it's got all the same steps in there. So you got that as a graphical form, but you've also got one there that's sequence of play that does not do it graphically. Again, it's a little floating window, and here you can actually configure this so that ooh, that's broken. I'm gonna have to take a look at that. This actually is supposed to list all the various steps. So updating the client from 3.5 something to 3.6 appears to have broken this. I will have to look at that. I rarely use it anyway, because once you know the steps, they're memorized. You don't have to call every single step. You just basically call the steps that you want to do. So here this would have let us check mark off things that we don't want to do. So for instance, there's a Seltorian shield cracker and web breaker. We could uncheck those if you're not playing Seltorian, and those steps never come up. Same thing with ESGs. If you're not playing a Lyran player, you can uncheck mark the one here that says ESG, and it never comes up. But anyway, as you go through, here they're showing up here when I do it. They're just not listed. So they're the same steps. Here. So you have shuttles, you have fire, you can decel and all that. It's the same steps. And I did uncheck mark a few things, that's why it's a little bit different. So if I put all the check marks back in, and do it again, there. So those are the steps there that you can call them out, or you can do them here by the menu. They're the same steps. But once the players learn the game, this sequence of play thing is not really needed, because you pretty much are only going to do on the impulse what you're going to want to do. So that kind of becomes irrelevant. But yeah, it looks like the update of the client has created an issue there I'm going to have to look at. Okay, so other games will have other types of trackers or controllers that'll play through. So in this game, Starfleet Battles, after you shoot your weapons, eventually you penetrate through the shields. You start damaging systems inside the ship until the ship blows up, kind of thing. And I actually have a damage chart for that. So when you roll a die to see what gets hit, it tells you what box to hit. In some games you have to, like this one here, you have to issue simultaneous orders. So that's what we have here with SOP orders. So it opens up a little window here. You type in what your orders are, and then you both reveal what your orders are. So everything happens simultaneously. So on impulse 5, both ships want to fire. They both open up this thing, write down what they're firing, and then after they've both written them down, they both reveal it, and then they perform that action kind of thing. And of course, you're going to have other tools in here. So you got dice rollers. You got little windows here for listing the units on the map. These are useful so that you can zoom out your map to be small so you can see the big over area, but you can still click on the piece in here and you can still tell the piece to move. And that's basically it for how to start a game. Every game is going to be a little bit different.